At first there was sound, a dry click as if someone had locked a door from the inside. Isabella stood by the window, and the fabric of her hem trembled slightly. From a draught or from her hands, no one could say for certain. She was not crying, she was not praying, she was simply waiting. The white dress pressed against her chest like armor. 12 women had embroidered it, weaving tiny pearls into the seams, symbols of purity and submission. The dress cost an entire city, and Isabella herself in that moment was worth nothing. Behind her lay the wedding, golden chalices, roasted swans, drunken faces, drunken but not his. The king did not drink, he barely spoke. He watched, not at her, not at the guests, he looked through everything. As if he heard a noise that no one else could hear, her mother had said that morning, "The main thing is not to argue. A wise woman always endures the first night. It will be easier after that." Isabella nodded, as she had nodded all her life. She had always been quiet, convenient, beautiful, like an expensive jewelry box that one enjoys placing on display. He entered without knocking. The king, her husband. Tall, almost motionless. He wore a white shirt. His hair was loose. His face, pale as a dungeon. He did not approach her. He did not say a word. He walked past her and stood in the middle of the room. Then he dropped to his knees and ran his hand across the floor for a long time, as if searching for something. Then he leaned down and kissed the stone. Isabella watched, did not move. He whispered, incomprehensibly. The words were not a prayer, not an address, rather a conversation, as if he were not alone in the room, as if someone else were here, someone only he could see. Isabella took a step back. Her spine touched the cold wall. He rose sharply, turned to her, and froze. His gaze, heavy, inhuman. He looked not at her face, but as if through it, as if searching for something inside her. What? She did not know, and did not want to know. He approached, quietly, slowly, and placed his hand on her shoulder, his fingers cold, heavy, like stone. He did not tear the dress from her, he did not press her to himself, he only stood beside her and breathed against her temple. She did not understand, would this be a night or a trial? And suddenly he whispered, "Do you hear?" She did not answer. He leaned closer. "They are here. They have come." Isabella felt something cold rising up her spine, as if there were less air in the room. He stepped back, sat by the bed, and began rocking back and forth, like a child who fears something or like a madman who no longer cares. An hour passed, maybe 2. She did not move, did not sit, did not undress. She simply stood. He fell asleep sitting, his face buried in his palms. Isabella slowly approached, looked down at him, and suddenly felt pity. No, not for him, for herself, for the girl who had thought that a wedding was a celebration, that a king was a man, that the first night was about passion. No, this was not passion, this was not love, this was fear wrapped in gold. Isabella lay down in the bed. Without undressing, she fell asleep on the edge, barely touching the pillow. Behind her, on the floor, her husband breathed quietly. The King of France, the man to whom she was now bound forever. And only the wind, smelling of incense, wandered through the room like a ghost. It knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Princess Who Was Given Away Without a Kiss. At first there was gold. It hung in the air, gleamed on curtains, reflected in polished surfaces. Little Isabella grew up in a castle where mirrors were taller than a person and staircases led into emptiness, balconies, peacocks, marble floors, and mother, a woman with smooth hands and a dry voice. She did not embrace, only taught. You must sit straight. Do not fall in love with your reflections. Remember, a man is an alliance, not a story. Isabella listened, wrote calligraphic lines about virtue, smiled at governesses, and thought that happiness was somewhere later, after the dance, after the bow, after the choice. The first man she smiled at was a gardener. He gave her a pear. She was 9. He was probably 20. She took the fruit and dropped it from fear, from joy, from the feeling that something could be received just like that without an order. Mother said, "Do not dare. You will have a king." Fia. This word was repeated often. They prayed to it, threatened with it, fed it with a spoon. You must be ready. He will be difficult, cold, great. When she turned 12, a letter came, long, smelling of dust. It said that France was choosing a bride for Charles, and the choice had fallen on the daughter of Ludwig of Bavaria, that is, on her. Father was silent, mother nodded, servants bustled about. From that day they began preparing her, from morning to evening, French lessons, lessons in submission. Fabric for a new wardrobe came from Venice. Her first corset was laced at 13. She could not breathe, but she smiled. At night she cried into her pillow soundlessly. She cried not from fear, from the impossibility of choosing. Her first real kiss happened in a dream, with a young man whose face she did not remember. He held her hands and whispered, "You should not belong to anyone." In the morning she forgot the dream, as one forgets oneself. The journey to Paris began early in the morning. The coachman said the road would take 3 weeks. Every night Isabella looked out the carriage window and tried to imagine the face of her future husband. She imagined kind eyes, warm palms, a voice. But in every fantasy, he somehow left. Always. When they arrived, the sun stood low. Charles was waiting for them in the inner courtyard. He wore a black cloak. He stood alone. Isabella stepped out, her heart beating so hard it made her sway. She curtsied. He looked, silently, but not at her. Above her, as if she were not there, and walked away. This was their first meeting. Without a smile, without words, without a kiss. And in that moment she understood. Being a queen did not mean being a woman. Being a bride did not mean being desired. And being Isabella meant keeping silent when you wanted to run. Paris greeted her with coolness and a gaze that was not there. This was a city where she was supposed to become someone's and stop being herself. Chapter 3. In the castle, where walls fear to scream. In this palace there was no echo. Sounds died in the walls as if swallowed. Servants spoke in whispers. Doors creaked as if they did not want to open. Even the queen's footsteps sounded somehow muffled, as if she walked not on marble, but on layers of dust settled over centuries of fear. Isabella woke before dawn, not because she had to, but because she could not sleep. After midnight, sleep ceased to be safe. Charles was kind in the morning, almost shy. He ate slowly. Sometimes he looked at her silently, as if seeing her for the first time. Then he took her hand, too firmly, but without pain. "Are you really here?" he asked once. "Yes," she answered. He nodded and said nothing more. After breakfast, he disappeared, sometimes for several hours, sometimes for the entire day, and when he returned, it was no longer him. He came at night, not as a husband, not as a lover, not as a human being. Once he entered her bedroom and stared at the fireplace for a long time. Then he approached the window, opened it, and threw out a feather from the pillow. "It whispers," he said. "It calls them." Whom? She did not ask. Sometimes he stroked her hair, softly, tenderly, as if trying to remember something, and then he would recoil sharply. "This is not you. This is not her. Who are you?" he would hiss. He demanded that she be near, but he did not touch her, did not kiss her, did not call her by name. Only "you," or he was completely silent. On those rare nights when he touched her, everything was strange. His hands were cold, his movements meaningless. He was not seeking intimacy. He seemed to be checking whether she existed. Isabella lay on her back, not moving. She looked at the ceiling, at the paintings where angels hid their faces in their palms, and thought, "If I do not scream, maybe he will leave. If I do not breathe, maybe he will not notice." But he noticed. He always returned, sometimes with feathers, sometimes with screaming, sometimes with blood on his hands. He said he had saved a sparrow, then that he had killed a demon, then that he himself had died, and now he was different. She tried to talk to him, but words did not reach him. He did not listen. He retreated into himself, like into a well, and did not return from there until morning. During the day she walked in the garden, but even there was no silence. The trees seemed to watch. Servants lowered their eyes. Prayers seemed foolish. Even the birds sang more quietly. She wrote letters to mother, to father, to God, but did not send them. She folded them in a drawer and then burned them because she did not know what to say. She was not a wife. She was not a widow. She was not a prisoner. She was a body next to which someone was going mad, and that someone was the King of France, the man with whom she shared a bed, but not a life. Every night was like a trial, every touch like a sentence, every glance like a knife thrust not into flesh but into the soul. She was not afraid of pain. She was afraid of becoming the same. She feared that this madness was contagious, that one day she would wake up and herself begin talking to dead birds. For now she simply lived, silently, carefully, in a castle where even the walls feared to scream.
Chapter 4. Body as Diplomacy.
Fear was the first to disappear. Not immediately, not completely. But one night she realized her heart no longer beat like a caged beast when the door creaked. It simply stopped, in expectation. He entered, as usual, slowly as if through water, stood by the bed, watched, did not speak, and did not approach. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, straight back, dress unbuttoned, palms on her knees. She was not trembling. She knew he was waiting, not for words, not for actions. He was waiting for something he could not name. That night she said nothing, only tilted her head, just a little, as if in a sign of respect, and in that movement was everything: submission, acceptance, reception. He stayed, but did not touch her. Sat on the floor by the window, looked into the darkness, then left. After that night, Isabella began to observe, not him, but his shadows, the rhythm of his steps, how he moved his fingers when nervous, how he froze if he heard a word similar to mother. He was not mad. He was dependent on ritual, on repeating forms. He came every evening, at the same time. She waited for him in the same position, with an open window, with a lit candle, in a shirt sliding off her shoulder. She became part of his system. He began to trust her. He said, "You are not like the others. You have the right eyes. When you are silent, I hear a voice." She did not answer immediately, but once, when he sat beside her, she said, "You are kind." Heeded her as if seeing her for the first time, and left. That night passed without pain, without touches, without fear. From that moment, everything changed. Now she was not just waiting, she was controlling. She learned the art of intonations, smiles, pauses, a slightly tilted head, fabric revealing a shoulder, a word spoken in half-whisper. He was not a man who could be seduced, but he was a man who could be influenced. He believed in signs. She became a sign. He believed in rituals. She became his prayer. He did not touch her if she did not look into his eyes. He left if she cried. He stayed if she was silent and sat motionless. Every part of her body became an instrument, a turn of the neck, permission, a hidden foot, detachment, an arched back, control. Servants noticed. They saw how he became quieter, how he stopped throwing himself at walls, how sometimes he smiled. They began to bow lower before her. Now she was not just a queen, she was medicine. And for the first time since the wedding, Isabella felt her body belonged to her, not as property, not as a toy, but as an instrument. And if the King of France needed her to keep from going mad, then France now needed her. And that was no longer fear. That was power. Chapter 5. She became his anchor. He began coming more often, no longer as a ghost frightening nights, but as a shadow seeking warmth. He came earlier, left later. Sometimes he did not leave at all. He fell asleep at her feet, his forehead pressed against the edge of the bed, like a child who had lost his mother. He no longer frightened. He depended. Isabella could hear him breathing beside her. His breathing became steady only if she was near. If she moved away, he began talking to emptiness. Sometimes he whispered dreams to her. "I saw you in the forest. You had black wings. You looked at me, and all the demons disappeared." Sometimes he asked, "Are you not afraid of me?" She answered, "No." He believed and stayed. The nobles were in panic. The king had stopped receiving them, stopped listening to advisors. But he spent every day with his wife. Servants whispered. The chancellor paled at the mere mention of her name, and she only smiled. Now she not only sat in the hall, she listened, remembered. Isabella learned quickly. She learned how audiences were conducted, how documents were signed, how to read the chancellor's handwriting, where seals were placed, where weaknesses were hidden. At first, she simply was present, then asked questions, then spoke instead of him. He sat with lowered eyes. She stood. They spoke on her behalf. Decisions depended on her words. She began meeting with bankers secretly, in the prayer room. Instead of candles, folders. Instead of prayer, reports. She listened to numbers, trade rules, supply routes. When one of the bankers dared to joke, "Your Majesty, do you even know how to count?" she answered, "Better than some generals know how to fight." After that, rumors spread like wildfire. She rules the country. She keeps him in bed. She is a witch. She is a saint. And she still walked through the palace, slowly, quietly, in long, dark dresses. She looked into the eyes of everyone who bowed. She remembered who was afraid and who wanted to embrace. France felt something was changing. The people stopped seeing the king, but began seeing the queen. And not just as a spouse, but as a force, as a center, as an anchor. Without her, he was lost. Without him, she only became clearer. Isabella no longer feared the darkness, because now darkness came to her for permission. Chapter 6. I am not afraid of you. That day smelled of burning from morning. Wind carried ash from fires where peasants burned old wheat. Smoke and anxiety hung in the air. The king had left for the hunt at dawn. He did not like to kill, but loved to pursue. His servant said he did not shoot game, but whispered something to it before letting it go. But that day, he did not return for lunch, did not return for dinner. He returned at night, and not alone, but with screaming. He burst into the palace, bathed in moonlight, burst in like a storm, like a wave breaking a dam. His face was covered in mud, his hands in blood. He threw his sword on the floor, tore open his shirt collar, and screamed, "They are coming! They are inside! They are laughing!" The nobles retreated. Servants scattered. Someone began reciting prayers. Someone fell to their knees. He thrashed about the hall, tore pillows, broke chairs, called demons by name. "Get out!" he screamed. "She let them in! This woman! This witch!" He did not name names, but everyone knew whom he meant. He called for her, and hated her, and feared her, and yearned for her, all at once. Isabella stood in the bedroom, heard everything. She was not frightened, did not move. She simply removed her dress, slowly, silently, naked. Pressed his forehead against her thigh, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Do not let go," he whispered. "Please, do not let go." She stroked his hair, slowly, calmly, and understood she was no longer afraid. He had become small. Not physically, he had become smaller inside. He was not a demon, not a madman, not a husband. He was a broken doll that history had thrust upon her. Before she had feared his screams, now his silence. Before she trembled at his touches, Now she held his hand when his teeth chattered from fear. He needed her like air. He could not live without her scent, without her gaze, without her silent agreement to be near. And she looked down at him, calmly, softly, as if at a child who had been frightened by his own shadow. After that night, she put on a black dress, without a crown, without jewelry. But everyone who saw her lowered their eyes, because now it was clear to all. She was not simply the king's wife. She was the one who held his world in her hands. The one who could bring down the palace with a single glance. The one whose body was no longer a victim, but power. Chapter 7. France divides in whispers. Rumors do not shout, they whisper. They hide under skirts, crawl through corridors, turn into side halls, huddle between goblets. First they spoke of her in the kitchen. Servants, not raising their eyes, pass to each other. She does not cry, even when he screams. Then, in the garden, nobles, hiding mockery in smiles, exchanged glances. She knows how to stop him. Then, in bedrooms, in whispers, with sighs, no longer about power, about something else. They began to fear her. They began to want her. In the evening, at receptions, men bowed before her longer than was proper. Their fingers lingered on her hand. A tremor appeared in their voice when they said, "Your Majesty." They knew. She was impossible to take, but they dreamed of being chosen. Women looked with poison. She bewitched him, said one. She is a witch, said another. She does nothing, simply looks, and everyone falls. She is not a woman, she is a trap. The king's brother once declared, "We no longer have a monarch, we have a temple, and she is the goddess within it." Crimson that he appeared, a young knight, beautiful as an icon. He was from the south, sent as a bodyguard. On the second day he was already reading her poetry. On the third he extended a flower with trembling fingers. On the fourth he tried to kiss her hand from the wrong side. She looked at him for a long time, without a smile, and then said, "You are beautiful and foolish." He blushed. She turned away. Her body no longer wanted admiration, did not want touches. It was a weapon that only she wielded. No one had the right to touch without invitation, and there would be no invitation. Her body served one purpose, not for love, for influence, for a world in which men lost their will beside her, for balance, where she was, the axis, and everything else revolved. The night soon left. The rumors remained. Now they said, "She does not love. She cannot. She is cold. She burned out her heart." And she walked through the halls like wind, not stopping, not looking back, and every step she took was a challenge to those who wanted to put her back in frames. She no longer asked permission. She no longer lived for someone else's gaze. For the first time in her life, her body belonged to her, completely, without conditions, without obligations, and the one she needed, she did not need at all. Chapter 8. Madness takes power, but not from her. First he forgets where he is, stands in the middle of the hall and looks at the ceiling, says, "I am on a ship." Servants freeze. She is silent. He spins in place, arms outstretched, as if catching wind. Then, suddenly grabs a candle and throws it at the wall. "The ship is sinking. Why are you silent?" He stops recognizing people. In the morning asks her name. In the evening calls her sister, and at night presses against her chest and says, "I am cold, like in snow, there, where they buried my mother, but she was not there. Did I invent her?" He became dangerous, but not as a man, like a shadow that does not understand what it is doing. He could laugh during Mass, throw a goblet in a priest's face, start singing at council, and no one dared contradict him because he was king. But everyone understood. France was left without a head, and she had a neck strong enough to hold a crown. That night, when he struck his brother, everyone froze. The brother pressed his lips together, wiped away blood, and left. The nobles looked at her. She did not cry, did not make excuses, simply rose from her chair, adjusted her hair, and quietly said, "From now on, orders will go through me." Not because they were frightened, but because they knew it would be better this way. She closed the doors. Literally. Entrances to the king's chambers were blocked. Questions were directed to her. Signatures were placed only after her glance. Then she disappeared for 3 days. No one knew where she was. And on the 4th morning, she stepped onto the balcony. In red, a dress heavy, flowing like blood on silk, lips painted, hair piled high, voice firm. In her hand, a scroll. The people gathered in the square. Some came from curiosity, some from fear, some because they felt something important would happen. She did not shout. She simply read. "In the name of the crown, in the name of stability, I, Isabella, wife of the king, take upon myself the leadership until His Majesty regains his reason." And silence. And then slow applause. 1, a second, a third, and soon the entire square was clapping. Not because they understood, but because they felt she was speaking truth, not from a position of strength, but from the position of a woman who had already survived hell. The nobles did not object. Priests were silent. The chancellor bowed. No one asked permission, because no one dared. She entered the council chamber, sat in the king's chair. Beside her, empty. He no longer came. Doctors tried to treat him. He screamed, fought, refused to eat. She visited him every day, brought warm milk, stroked his hair. He did not recognize her. Sometimes he would freeze and say, "Mama?" She nodded, "Yes, rest," and left. Not with pain, but with dignity, because now everything was in her hands. France no longer belonged to a man losing his face. France looked into the eyes of one who did not tremble, who did not cry, who was not afraid. Isabella became not simply a voice. She became law, and law, as is known, does not need a crown, if behind it is a confident hand. Chapter 9. Wine, Flesh, and Abdication. She was not looking for him. She was not waiting. She did not believe that someone could appear in her life not for power, not for fear, not for court games. But one day he entered the hall, dusty, in a traveling cloak with a face that held neither reverence nor awe, only calm. He was a merchant, not a nobleman, not a prince, not a general. He traded wine and fabrics. He was known in Marseille and in Bruges. He spoke directly, moved freely, and did not bow his head. Servants gasped when he first looked into her eyes and did not look away. "You are not what they say," he said. "And you are not what I am used to," she replied. He did not write her poetry, did not give her jewels, but once, passing by, he took her by the wrist and lightly bit it. Not painfully, carefully, but enough to make blood rush to her cheeks. She laughed as she had not laughed since youth, laughed, throwing back her head, without fear of being heard. He did not call her queen, called her by name, said she reminded him of the sea in foul weather, dangerous, wild, inevitable. They met secretly, but did not hide. They were seen, they were discussed. She did not explain. At night he came to her room. She met him barefoot, in wine, in silk, in desires. He knew where to place his palm, how to breathe. He did not demand. He took, but only what she gave herself. She ran away with him once, in a red cloak, through the back door, without guards, without servants, laughed, holding his hand, sat with him in a tavern, drank wine, licked her fingers after eating, danced on the dirty floor to the squeak of a violin. She was not a queen, she was a woman, alive, hot, desired, but in the morning everything changed. She returned to the castle, alone, still in the same red cloak, but with a different look. In her hand was a paper, signed, dry, clear, abdication. From power, from name, from throne. Everything I wanted has already happened, she told the chancellor. And what did you want? He asked. To be myself, she answered, and walked past. She did not go to the man, did not leave with him, did not hide in a village. She simply cast off everything, and for the first time in many years breathed with full lungs, because power is not a crown, and woman is not a title, and love is not passion. This is freedom and choice, made not by decree, but by heart. Chapter 10. The last night when he called her by name again. He died slowly, not from a wound, not from poison, not from a blow. He died like a tree that the wind dries, quietly, slowly, imperceptibly. First he stopped getting up, then eating, then speaking. Doctors shrugged their shoulders, priests whispered prayers. She was silent. She simply sat beside him. This was the same bed where he had once screamed, scratched, fought in fear, where once he had grabbed her by the hair and sobbed, where he called demons, where he was silent for hours staring at the wall. Now he was quiet, light, almost weightless. He lay like an infant neatly covered with a blanket. She held his hand, palm, dry, transparent, like parchment, fingers, weakly squeezing hers, almost automatically. There was no one in the room, only she and he, and breathing, that became rarer with each minute. Time stopped. There were no longer courtiers. There was no throne room. There was no France. There was only a man who had once frightened her to trembling, and now lay before her, defenseless, like a shadow of himself. He opened his eyes, with difficulty, gaze cloudy but clear. For a second, she saw in him not a madman, but that youth who had been promised to her once in a letter. He looked at her for a long time. Then his lips trembled, and he whispered, "Isabella." She did not start, did not cry, simply ran her palm across his forehead, slowly, as a mother lulls a child. "Yes, I am here." Almost imperceptibly, and died, without sound, without words, without farewell. In the morning she rose, did not put on mourning, did not put on gold. Did not call anyone, she left the palace barefoot, walked through corridors where they had feared her, past servants who lowered their heads, past guards who did not dare stop her. She wore a simple dress, hair loose, no crown, no name. No one called out to her. No one dared. Because the one she had been no longer existed. No queen remained. No wife remained. No woman whose body belonged to the palace remained. Only a legend remained. The one who married a monster and made him hers.